So from now on he would live on his wits and eat what he could earn, beg or steal. No. Something inside him made him turn from stealing. It would be a last resort. Luke wasn't bad, despite what matron and master said of him, and he wasn't stupid. He'd learned all he could when he had the chance, although all too often his punishment was to sit in the corridor staring at the wall. However, he could write his name, calculate in his head, and he knew many things from what he'd read in the books he'd borrowed from the shelves in the schoolroom and hid under his pillow. It was how he'd learned about London, the King and Queen, and the Great War that had happened years before he was born. Luke was instinctively honest. He didn't want to do anything that the woman with the soft hands and sweet smile would be ashamed of, and wondered if she was his mother. He must have had parents, but no one would ever tell him what had happened to them, though once matron had smiled as she told him he had no one. "You're alone in the world," she'd told him. "This is all you've got, all you'll ever have. So behave and make things better for yourself." Luke hadn't believed her, even before his trip to hospital. Other children told him about their lives before the home, and after he'd seen those nurses, he'd known there was another life, if he could just find it. He'd planned for his escape all the time, wondering how best to get out. Luke owned nothing. He'd been given nothing but his food and clothes, so he had no possessions to take with him, and no real idea of the value of money, having never had a penny to spend. He knew a few of the other children received visits from aunts, uncles, or grandparents, and had seen the children given a book, some sweets, or money. But Luke was never given anything, and no one ever visited him. There must have been money somewhere in that place, but Luke didn't know where it was kept. In any case, that would have been stealing. So when he'd left, it was with just the bread roll. It didn't bother him. Perhaps it was true that you didn't miss what you'd never had. But those few days of comparative freedom in the hospital had shown him what he was missing, and he'd known what he needed to do. A sense of elation came to him as he saw the bus shelter ahead. He went inside and sat down, out of the wind. He chewed the roll slowly, knowing that it might be a while before he got another. Although Luke had never been on a bus, he had seen them going by the orphanage. People sat in them and were taken places, so he needed to get a ride on one, heading somewhere. But he also knew that money was needed, and he had none. Sighing, he turned to leave. But just as he did, he saw something silver shining in the corner of the bus stop and went to pick it up, turning it over and over in his hand, reading the words. There was a picture of the king's head on one side, some writing and a date, and on the other an engraving and more words. Luke read them with difficulty, and then realised that he was holding a half-crown. He'd learned about money in arithmetic. How far would that take him? Luke slipped the money into his pocket and sat down again. He'd found it, so it wasn't stealing. As he debated what to do next, a bus came along the road and then stopped. Without consideration, Luke got on and went to sit down at the front. There were 6 other passengers in seats, and none of them looked at him beyond a passing glance. When the conductor came, Luke offered the half-crown, and the man asked where he wanted to go. He said Leicester, because that was where the hospital was, and the conductor nodded and gave him a smaller coin and a ticket. He looked at the coin. It said 3p on it, and he pocketed it. He wasn't sure what it would buy, but perhaps a small roll or something. It didn't matter. Finding the bus fare for the first stage of his journey showed that he was meant to leave. He would live and work in Leicester for a while, and then make his way to London. The hospital was too close to the orphanage for him to stay there for long. Chapter 2. April 1939. Betty Stewart sighed as she left her work that morning. She'd been given a few hours cleaning at the Rosie Infirmary by the matron, Miss Mary Thurston, for which she was very grateful. Since her husband Tony's sudden death 2 years earlier, Betty was finding life harder and harder. It wasn't the scrubbing of the wards and toilets.